Enfold Proactive Health Trust, Creating Safe Spaces, presents Demystifying Sexuality, a video series. How to talk with a child when there is suspicion of sexual abuse. Presented by Shoiba Saldana, co-founder, Enfold Proactive Health Trust, obstetrician and gynecologist.
We're going to look at two areas. One is where a child is telling you something and saying that something may have happened, and the other possibility is the child is not saying anything but you suspect it. Now, if a child comes forward and speaks to you, they'll come up, and there's a lot of discomfort when the child speaks about it, because basically we have in a way prevented children from speaking about body parts because we ourselves as adults have never given them respectful names for these parts. We may say mouth and nose and chest and arms, but we never say penis, we never say vagina, we never say buttocks in a non-judgmental, totally comfortable way. So for the child to speak about this is difficult. So when a child comes up and speaks, we don't say what happened, and it's very important how we maintain our face, because the child looks at you and sees a reflection of what they're saying. So if I go, what happened? One of the commonest things we say as adults is, why didn't you tell me earlier if this has happened earlier? But please understand, it takes a child enormous courage to come and speak about it. So sometimes it may be a week after the incident, 6 months after the incident, it may be 5 years after the incident. At each time, we respect the courage of the child for having come and spoken to us at that point of time. So when the child comes up and says this, the first thing we do is keep a calm, relaxed expression on your face. We tend to get anxious and look like this, and I'd like each one of you to one day go and see yourself in a mirror when you're in an anxious mood. Your face can be very scary for a little child. So calm yourself down and say, I'm so glad that you're telling me. Would you like to tell me? Shall we go and sit somewhere? So one thing is, of course, privacy and confidentiality. Now, one of the biggest issues, the POCSO Act, besides its very positive effects, one of the biggest problems is that of mandatory reporting. So you need to understand that if a child talks to you about child sexual abuse, you are mandated to report to the police, to the nearest police station, not just to your superior. Like if you're a teacher, to your principal, or if you're a nurse or a doctor, to the head of the institute, you need to have to tell the police. However, POCSO does not give a definite timeline as to when you need to speak from when you got to know. So if that is the case, you have some time to prepare the child to talk about it. Also, for one problem is that if the child tells me and I immediately report it, the child may turn around and say, nothing like this happened. I didn't say anything. And then instead of helping the child, we have caused more harm. So we need to balance the importance of mandatory reporting against the well-being of the child and the child's ability to stand up and speak about it to a counselor, to the police, and further down the criminal justice system. So now the child has come forward, and it's very, very important not to ask very searching questions. To reassure the child that they are speaking whatever is necessary and it's absolutely okay. A lot of the times we ask questions out of a sense of curiosity. What happened? What did he do to you? And if you sense that the child is uncomfortable, don't ask. The moment a child speaks, that they are able to break the silence which has held the secret in their heart, they start healing. So the moment they have a trusted person, a caring person, a person who's committed to their well-being, who listens to them, immediately the healing starts, because it is the silence which causes harm. The silence of having faced sexual abuse and not being able to speak about it. So just listen and let the child speak in their own time. It may take 2-3 sessions, but the child needs to know it's fine. When would you like to talk to me? What is important probably is to understand what happened, who is the person, and how close are they to the child in terms of the risk to the child. So we are looking at, is this a parent? Is this a relative at home? Is this staff in the school the child is going to? Is this somebody, an older student? Who is this person? Or is this a stranger? So is this something which happened as a one-off, a chance encounter in a train, or when the child was, shopping, some person grabbed the child and walked away. So we know now the child is not in danger, but the child needs to speak about it. So here the importance is for the child to talk to you. In another case, it is about preventing the child from going back to meeting the abuser again and again. So what we have found that trying to jump into things doesn't actually help the child. There have been times when somebody has immediately reported and people have tried to talk to the child and the child panics. Or the family closes up against the child and they go and say nothing like this happened. And the fact that under 18 a child is under the guardianship of the parents. So if the parents choose to not allow you to speak to the child, it can happen. That would be an issue. Let's look at another scenario. There is something that you feel as a teacher or a social worker where you feel there may be something which is worrying the child. We don't always assume it's child sexual abuse, but we must always remember that it can be child sexual abuse. Somehow, a lot of the times we look at the social structures, maybe the parents are going through a divorce or the child has lost somebody very close like a loved grandmother. They have shifted to a new school. The child's best friend has left school. There is a new sibling in the house and the child is feeling insecure. The child is facing some issues in studies. All these things could also cause changes. So we need to understand that child sexual abuse is not the only cause for behavioral issues, but it must be recognized as an important cause which has to be checked out. So what we do with the child is, first of all, we talk to the child and we build a relationship of trust, build a rapport with the child. And this comes with not directly asking questions which may be disturbing to the child. So we ask the child to come and sit with us. We keep a sense of privacy. There should be some sense of confidentiality where you tell the child, is there something that's worrying you? I'd like to know. And this only builds up over a period of time. So the child may take time to speak to you. I know certain counselors have spoken to me that on the 15th or 16th counseling session, a teenager or a young adult has spoken about the child sexual abuse that they faced. So it takes a long time to get there, and I don't think we should rush it. It has to be when the child is ready. So very often after we go through the initial formalities of talking to the child, where do you study, always ask non-threatening questions. So which class you're going to, which school, who's your favorite teacher, which is your favorite subject. Please don't ask about marks because it's a very depressing topic. Unless the kid is first, which happens to be one child in a class of 30 or 70. On an average, most of us are average students, and I don't like telling people about my marks. So please don't ask marks. Then we can ask about who all are at home, and that's where you get a sense of what's happening in the house. If they say mother, but they're not talking about the father, if they say grandmother or just one or two adults, we're getting a sense of what's happening in the family. And we don't ask questions, where's your father? We don't ask that. We wait for the child to bring it up a little later. Then we start talking about who all are there in the house, and you could ask things in a child who's between 5 and 8, maybe the daily routine. Who wakes you up in the morning, gives you a bath? What did you have for breakfast? Who packs your food for you? Who are the friends you eat with? What are the games you like? What's your favorite color? Do you have a particular dress you like? Which are the functions that you celebrate in your house? So these are things where the child is giving you very, very important information, but in a very non-threatening manner. As you ask questions, watch the body language of the child. The child, if you ask, so what do your parents do when the child looks down like this, or starts looking away, or turns the subject away, says, I need to go to class. So the child stops the session over there. You know there's something over here which is worrying the child. So you can come back to it in a different manner. Now, when we talk about actual abuse, we understand there is a continuum. There is a physical abuse, there is an emotional abuse, there is sexual abuse. In fact, sexual abuse is just a form of a physical plus an emotional abuse. There could be physical touching, pain, discomfort, which causes emotional fear. Or it could be an emotional abuse where the person is speaking things which are beyond, which are inappropriate for the child, or sexually suggestive things which the person is saying, which is deeply affecting the child, which may not be physically abusing, but can be extremely disturbing for the child. So we can understand there are contact and non-contact types of abuse that the child may face. So I often start by giving an example of from my own life. I say, when I was 15, when I was 5, there was a boy who was 15 years old, and he used to come and work in the garden sometimes. And sometimes he'd tell me, come behind the tree, I'll show you something. And I was 5 and I was like, yeah, let me come. And I would go behind the tree and he would try to touch me or try to take off my clothes. And I didn't know it was wrong, but I wasn't sure whether it was right. But somehow I didn't feel I could tell my parents about it. I felt very embarrassed, uncomfortable. And then he would say, don't tell anybody, okay? And we are always telling children, listen to your elders. So I would be like, I don't know, he may do something bad to me if I say, or my mother will scold me. So sometimes children often feel that we'll be scolded for something, not realizing that it's the older person who did it and we didn't have a say in the matter. So we go very slowly. So I often say this would happen. Sometimes I would say, when I go to the playground, sometimes when I was small, 8 or 9, in the playground, there was this man who would be there, and he would sometimes take off his pants in front of us, and we were like, what is he doing? Such a funny fellow, oh my God, and we would run away. We were half scared, half amused, and then we'd go and giggle on one side, but we were a little scared, and we didn't know whom to tell. And I think that's what stopped us sometimes. I sometimes give an example of a boy who told me when he was about 9 or 10 that his cousin would sometimes come over and stay with him, and she would, try to speak to him or show him pictures which were sexual or of naked pictures, and he would be half excited because he loved his cousin very much, and his cousin had a very good space in the house. His parents used to always say, see, she's so smart, she's so good at studies, you should be like her. And yet she would do something which he felt was not okay. But then whom do you tell? Right? So I would give these examples that sometimes an older person whom we like, whom we trust, or who our family thinks is a great person, says or does something to us which makes us feel uncomfortable, makes us feel unsafe, and we don't know how to respond. And I said that now when I grow up, I realize that I should have said, I don't want to see this, I don't want to do that, that's not okay, but I just didn't know. And so now I tell the person, the child, that if you're going through something like this, I would really like to help you. And sometimes as a child we can't fight an older person, but if we get people who are adults who can help us, it might work. I also tell them sometimes, if you don't want to tell me, is there somebody else you would like to tell? Who do you think in your house would be somebody you could talk about these things to? And sometimes we just draw a piece of paper, an A4, and I make them put their hand on it and draw the outline. And then you have this hand with 5 fingers, and I say, write your name on the palm and write the name of 5 trusted adults you would like to speak to. So this gives me a sense. So it could be a mother, father, grandmother, aunt, it could be a teacher, it could be a friend's mother, it could be an elder sister or brother. So there are many people who a child would instinctively trust, and these are people you can approach to help the child. When we go from a bullying context, so sometimes we talk about, older boys may push you, and physical abuse is very common among boys particularly. Emotional abuse seems to be more common among girls. Though again, as we were talking of gender fluidity, we don't really want to just categorize as boy and girl. Sometimes they're not very sure what their attractions are. So they may feel, well, I'm a boy or I'm a girl, but I'm attracted to the same gender, or I'm attracted in a different manner from the others, the way the other friends talk. And this often happens to 12, 13, 15-year-old teenagers, boys and girls, and others. And so these are the people who have a gender identity confusion. And usually the confusion is created by our society because we want them to be a boy or a girl. We want them or expect them to be heteronormative. We expect them to have certain sorts of attractions which are acceptable socially, what we see in the movies. And so when they're not that, they are more liable to face abuse because they're more vulnerable to be caught, because perpetrators often look for a child who's confused, who seems to be outside the normal groups, the outlier, the child outside, and they get targeted. And since this child is already lonely and confused, an older person coming, speaking to them in a warm, caring manner can often sort of pull the child into physical intimacy, into a sexual relationship where the child goes in uncomfortable but sometimes agreeable to what's happened. This is not consent. This is not consent, because consent means I understand what I have committed myself for. I understand the consequences of my action. So very often when a child says, but I wanted to, we understand that they were okay about going into it, but when the act actually happens, or they get involved in it, or they start facing consequences, like sometimes they may be blackmailed, they may be coerced, photographs may be taken of them, which may be used against them to force them into further sexual intimacies, they get worried. At no time must we ever judge the child. The child may have gone 100 times back to the abuser because they didn't know how to say no, or they were not sure whether they wanted to say no. And these are the reasons why the child may have gone back again. So please never judge the child for having gone back repeatedly. Never make the child feel small for any of the act they have. And in fact, sometimes when they talk about what's happening, we may feel disturbed because we understand the physical and emotional trauma the child may have gone through. But it's also important for us to be calm and relaxed and say, I'm so glad you're telling me this. Sometimes after a child has spoken about this and the child is a little calm, I often say, if I was walking down the road and somebody on a scooter actually dashed me deliberately, like they came and banged into me and dropped me down, and I get hurt, I hurt my head, I get a cut, or I break my arm, and I go and I get help, and it hurts like crazy, and I feel scared that someone actually tried to hurt me. And then I go to the hospital, maybe I get stitches, I get bandages, for 5-6 weeks I'm in pain, and then it goes away. Now, after 1 year, 2 years, can you see any marks on my hand? No. Can you see any marks on my head? No. For a little while later, for 6 months, a year, when I hear a scooter, I may be scared because it reminds me of the pain I went through. But over a period of time, that also goes away. And so the most important thing I tell children is, when someone molests you, it feels horrible, it's scary, it's terrifying. Sometimes we feel ashamed, we feel guilty, we somehow think it's our fault. And the most important thing we need to know, it's not my fault. I didn't do anything to ask for it. Even if I went to that person's house or to their room, or they took the chocolate they gave me, I did not ask for something which was painful or which I didn't understand what was going to happen later. And I can heal. I can become a complete human being. I am a complete human being. I got hurt, but I can get over my fear, I can get over my worry, and I need never feel ashamed or guilty because it wasn't my fault.
This video is part of a series of videos and learning content aimed at addressing gender-based violence. These videos provide practitioner perspectives by professionals and experts in the field. We hope these videos generate further discussions with peers, family members, and teachers, encourage curiosity, and seed further research ideas in these domains. We gratefully acknowledge the following for their support: Gaurav Krishna, Keshav Rajendran, Ishwar Shankar, Mohan Ram, Clockwork Captions, Enfold Consultants, Ford Foundation. The copyright and other intellectual property rights in respect of this video belong exclusively to Enfold Proactive Health Trust, Enfold. Enfold licenses this video under the terms of Creative Commons License CC BY-NC-ND 4.0, the details of which can be found at https://creativecommonlicense.org/licenses/by-NC-ND/4.0/. Any use or reproduction of this video contrary to or in violation of the terms of the aforesaid Creative Commons license will be illegal and Enfold reserves the right to take suitable action in respect thereof. Enfold also reserves the right to modify, terminate, or revoke the license granted as aforesaid, or otherwise exercise any and all rights in respect of its intellectual property without further notice, and the same shall be binding on the licensee or user or reader thereof. June 2021. Enfold Proactive Health Trust. www.enfoldindia.org. Contact info@enfoldindia.org. +91 99 000 94251. www.enfoldindia.org.